Eckhart Tolle often says that the totality flows through me or you or us. And the way I interpret that in my Blaney theory of etheric flux is as follows. If you put this current view here of the river onto a Euclidean grid, you can model the flow of the water using the Navier-Stokes equations of flow, making various assumptions about the viscosity of the water, the polarity of the molecules and how they interact with each other, the temperature of the water, and how that temperature gives rise to its electrical, viscoelastic, and other properties. And you could model the flow of the water, which would match it. And the more accurate your assumptions, of course, the more perfect your model would match the actual flow of the circular whirlpool type flow patterns and eddies that form naturally as each region of molecular water is affected by its outside surroundings. You might find a temporary whirlpool that lasts a whole minute or longer if a rock is stationary and causes that whirlpool to continue. You could call these as having a somewhat semi-stable lifetime. Now, the ether which I speak about that flows over the Euclidean grid of our universe and of this river, this fluid has a different viscosity depending on what size scale you're looking at, and what range of sizes that your molecular fluid flow model is modeling. Now, for the practicality of us creating a model for the flow of a vortex in the ether that is what we see and measure as a photon of visible light, that, the dimensions in that range are, you could just say the wavelength of light is 450 nanometers approximately, so you could say that around that range, that order of magnitude of distance, this is the valid distance, maybe 10 to the third above and below that range of distance. That is, from 1 meter down to 10 to the minus 6 meters, or maybe it's 10 to the minus 16 meters, but there's some relevant distance in which your model will apply. And for the purpose of ether that forms a photon of light that we label as visible light, blue light, we will observe a flow of ether that has eddies within it and smaller eddies within those eddies down to 0 dimension of space. And then we will also find bigger eddies, such as, say you have a ray of sunlight and the blue photon hits the water and enters a whirlpool of the ocean. Like a whirlpool, like just a normal whirlpool that you see, and it's going around. That light wave will interact with that whirlpool differently. It'll bend differently, for example, as it flows through it, than it would if it went into placid lake of the same water. So I'm pointing this out to illustrate the fractal nature of the circular flow patterns that are naturally formed in all fluids, including the ether, the most fundamental fluid of which we're all made. So if we were to model this light photon in the range of blue color, we would have a viscosity that was a relevant viscosity at that size scale. And there would be electrical properties that would be then translated into the flow pattern of the ether modeled in a accurate enough way to capture the electromagnetic structure of the field at every point in space at smaller and smaller dimensions until the size was no longer relevant. As an aside, it may be that this modeling can never actually model, because in reality, any intelligent person thinking about this they would all agree that since the eddies go smaller and smaller, eddies within eddies within eddies down ad infinitum, you'll never be able to model them all, because it would be an infinitely sized model. And then we run up to the same logic as Gödel's theorem. You have to have a system bigger than the system in order to model the system properly. And if the system is infinite in terms of flow textures going down to 0 size scale, you could never model it. And it's possible that you can put fudge factors on it to simulate what the perfect model would be, but that'll be as close as humans can get. The only way you can actually model it is to make your consciousness experience it all, and then you're one with it, and that will be the closest you'll ever get to seeing or experiencing it. But if you're just going to talk about it, you can't model it perfectly. Nevertheless, I would like to propose that a model could help us understand the nature of matter by creating this etheric flow with nested vortex patterns. And for each vortex size and energy level, we would need to see its contribution to the bulk viscosity. For example, if your model was going to have a bulk viscosity. And the bulk viscosity of the ether that creates the blue photon will be so low that we probably can't even imagine it, but it is non-zero. Definitely has a viscosity because there's some resistance, and that resistance is caused by the fluctuating 0 point energy densities at every point. So if you're a photon flowing through the ether, if it was placid, you would go in a straight line, but if it has 0 point energy in it, which it does, you as the photon would kind of meander back and forth across the 0 point field ever so slightly to account for the various quote warped space-time regions that you would run into, unquote, or as I put it, the etheric acceleration vector field changes that you would observe as you flowed through the ether. So I have now just tried to give an analogy of modeling this water versus modeling the ether to show you what I mean. They're both fluids, they both have viscosity, and they both have rules that you can model the flow. And my model of a photon is a 0th order model that is meant to put a light bulb in someone's head. And then on top of this proposed model, I would imagine the next step in making the model more accurate would then be to add the nested levels of eddies to the viscosity of my flow model. Right now I'm proposing the model in visual form, the same way someone would propose the flow of this unknown tornado that just knocked down all the Kansas City barnyards. They would propose a flow for the air that would have enough power to knock over all these barns, and they would come up with the vortex pattern. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm saying I know that the photon has to be a vortex because of process of elimination, and I know the electron has to be a vortex flowing in a circular pattern, forming sort of a toroid, twisting toroid. I know it has to be, again, process of elimination. So knowing this, I will now propose a model for it. And these 0th order models that are meant to be expanded upon, kind of like with infinite series terms, these are my best way of communicating the complicated model with the infinite series terms without using the complicated infinite series terms, because we're thinking about it in a visual way. Thank you for listening.